Hi there, this is Laurel with Green Roots. Today we are going to talk about finding the parents of Vincent J. Hudson. So if you recall from the last video blog, if you watched that, um, the first research question we had was we had began researching Vincent J. Hudson and discovered that there were two of them. And then we're able to identify by researching both Vincent J. Hudson's that they had different children and that one had migrated to both Missouri and Illinois, and the other one had stayed in Kentucky. So now we are going to continue our research and we're going to go back into Kentucky and we are going to look to identify Vincent J. Hudson's parents. Okay, so let's start by talking about what our research plan is. Um, in our last video, we identified a couple Hudsons that we wanted to dig into. So one is Alexander Hudson and the other is Agnes Hudson. We'll talk about them. And then we have some more Hudsons that we're going to discover that we will talk about next. And we will finish by looking at about 40 years, or we'll look at a summary of about 40 years of tax lists. And then we will move on to our conclusion and next steps. Okay, so let's start by defining our research question. So if you are doing any research in genealogy, you'll know that rabbit holes are very easy to go running after or to go jumping down. So first thing you want to do is identify your research question and really focus with any research that you do that you're continuing to look at that particular question. So our research question is, who are the parents of Vincent J. Hudson? Okay, so we are going back to the very early days of Kentucky, which is kind of exciting. So this is the beginning of the state. This particular county was formed in 1798. Wasn't the first county, but it was one of the first groups of counties. And you can see it's located in, and this is a 1798 map of Pulaski County, Kentucky, but it is located to the south, near the border with Tennessee and, east central. Okay, so our research plan was, first of all, we had identified a couple Hudsons on the same census as Vincent J. Hudson in Missouri. So we wanted to research both of them to see if they might be related. And those people are Agnes and Thomas Hudson. Secondly, we are going to study Alexander Hudson. As we started to look for probate records for Vincent J. Hudson and other Hudsons, we did find an Alexander Hudson. We were actually within the deeds, we found some deeds for Alexander Hudson. And in one of them, he was appointed as a representative for Louisa Jane Reed, who was married to Alexander Reed. So knowing that Vincent J. Hudson is married to Susanna Reed or Susan Reed, this is a clue for us that this might be a relative. So with these three people, we want to make sure that we find all their census records and marriage records, and then we're going to go beyond the basics. So I will take you through how we can do this. So let's identify Alexander and Agnes Hudson. So if you recall from the last video, or just to review, we had looked at the deeds for Pulaski County, Kentucky, and we found one for an Alexander Hudson. And because Vincent J. Hudson's, it's either his oldest or second oldest son is named Alexander, decided to follow this particular name and also discovered that there was a transaction that took place between Alexander Hudson and Alex Reed. So again, really good clue because of Vincent J. Hudson's married Susan Reed, that this could be a connection and could be a relative. Okay, so first, I took a look, I searched for marriage records and I found these nice typed up record compilation that we have for Pulaski County, Kentucky. I found this on Family Search, and it is showing a marriage at about the right time for Alexander Hudson based off of his name, but a marriage to a Sandy Hudson who married Nancy Aldridge on the 6th of November of 1809. And this is a great record because we now have a couple more Hudsons to look at. We have a Levi Hudson who was the witness. And then we also have the consent of both fathers here. So Sandy Hudson, who we believe is Alexander Hudson, his father is Robert Hudson Sr., looks like. And then Nancy Aldridge's father is Francis Aldridge. What I wanted to also point out is we had found also Alexander Hudson's probate. And it does mention his wife Nancy, so that would help us match up that this is in fact Alexander Hudson, this Sandy Hudson. Okay, so some great clues on that record. Now we're going to look for all his census records. And Alexander Hudson, we actually found census records going all the way back to 1810 when he had first gotten married. And then I found 1830, 1840, 1850, and 1860, and he died sometime after 1860. So the 1850 and the 1860 censuses are where I'm going to actually see household member names. But by that time, Alexander and Nancy's children had moved out of the household. So I was not able to see any children's names on those census records. Did find a granddaughter. And the granddaughter was from a daughter, I believe, Malvina, perhaps, Rayborn. So anyway, let's take a look at this 1830 census. And what this shows us is, Vincent J. Hudson was born in 1815. We'd expect to see him in the household at this time. I don't see any males his age. And actually, I don't see any males except for Alexander, but I do see 6 females. So a lot of females in the household here, but no sons that we can tell. Okay, so that tells us we probably should be looking elsewhere for the father of Vincent J. Hudson, but we want to continue to look for records for Alexander Hudson because he is, very likely connected to the family, and we will find connections that will, where he's mentioned in records that can help us identify this family and potentially Vincent J. Hudson's father. Okay, so let's take a look at Agnes Hudson. So if you'll remember, Vincent J. Hudson, he was originally married in Kentucky and then he moved around a lot. So I don't know if he was a tenant farmer, but he was in Rawls, Missouri in 1840. And he did have a daughter in 1842 born in Missouri. So that helped us match up this record. And what also is interesting on this record is that we have an Agnes Hudson and a Joseph Hudson who appear to, likely this particular census, which is not in alphabetical order, was recorded in order of residence. So hopefully this is a good indication that these Hudsons lived in the vicinity of Vincent J. Hudson or were connected. And so Agnes Hudson, interestingly, she's between 50 and 60 years of age, and she has another daughter in the household who's between 20 and 30. Now, she also has a man in the household, age 50 and 60, which threw me off a little bit because, if she had moved over with Levi or with her husband, sorry, you would expect him to be the head of the household. So, perhaps this is a brother-in-law, but somebody else who is living with her, but is not heading up the household. And then she has a couple sons. One is grown up between 20 to 30, and one's a teenager. And then we also have a Thomas Hudson here, who's aged between, I believe that says between 30 and 40. He is, about the same age as Vincent J. Hudson and probably is, a possible brother. Okay, so let's research Agnes Hudson. We want to see We're going to go back to Pulaski County, see if we can find a marriage record. And same collection, it was actually on the same page as Sandy Hudson's marriage record, but Agnes Toombs married Levi Hudson. So this is possibly the same Agnes. And in this case, we just have Marvel Nash as a witness and the consent of Agnes's mother. And they were buried in 1807 and also in Pulaski County. So good clue that tells us that, perhaps Agnes is married to Levi Hudson, who we already know is connected to Alexander Hudson, based off of Alexander Hudson's marriage record. Okay. Also, now I would actually like to show you, I did find another census record for Agnes. I'm just going to show you that. Here we go. In my little ancestry record here. But this was a really valuable record to find, and this is why it's so important to, find all those different census records. But I did find her in 1860, and she was still in Rouse, Missouri. And what you can see here is she's living in the household with several other people. So she is living in the Joseph Dodd household. We don't know that name yet, but if we look on the record here, I'm going to go back to the other page here. We'll see that Joseph has a wife named Letitia, and she was born in Kentucky. So, perhaps this is a daughter of Agnes. And then we can see their daughter is named Agnes, named after their grandmother probably, and then their son here is named Levi, named after their grandfather, most likely. And then we also have James. We have another couple here, William and Cynthia Hardin. They're both born in Kentucky. And then we have Agnes Hudson here, who's about 50 something years old and was born in Virginia. So this is, I believe, the same Agnes Hudson. And we have very likely identified two daughters of her. We know Thomas is probably a son. And then we also took a look at deeds and found a deed between Joel Hudson and Agnes Hudson. So remember deeds, you're going to find those in the catalog search. So you're going to go to the Pulaski County catalog and family search, and you're going to go under the land records, and then there's an index to deeds. And in this particular case, there's an alphabetical index for both the grantors and the grantees. And I'm sorry, this is Pulaski County. We were actually looking at Rouse County, Missouri, but same type of process where we're going to identify any deeds that we can find for Agnes Hudson. So we did find a deed for Agnes Hudson, where Joel Hudson, actually Joel Hudson sold a lot of his property to Agnes Hudson. So he sold her all of his livestock and then also a bed and bedding. And this was in 1848 in Rawls County, Missouri. Okay, so this is a good indication that they're related. At this time, people sold their beds to their relatives. So it's very likely that Joel Hudson and Agnes Hudson are related. So who's Joel Hudson? Is he another son? I looked for Joel Hudson. I looked for census records. I looked in Rawls, Missouri. I looked in Clark, Illinois, where Vincent moved to. I also looked for marriage records, and I didn't find anything. So one thing that occurred to me is that this possibly is Vincent J. Hudson, and this could represent a record of a sale between his mother and Vincent J. Hudson, who is otherwise known as Joel. So that is one possible theory for this particular record. Okay. All right, now, so remember, we now have a husband for Agnes um, Hudson, Agnes Toombs Hudson. We've also referenced a Robert Hudson, who is the father of, looks like Levi and Alexander Hudson. So we're going to take a look at Robert Hudson as well. And so we'll start with those census and marriage records. We already have the marriage record for Levi Hudson, but here he is on the 1830 census. And again, on these before 1850, we just have counts by age range and gender. But we did have a son in the 15 to 19 age range. I believe that's right here. And he would be in the same age range as Vincent J. Hudson. So, son about the same age living in the household with Levi Hudson. Okay. So again, we wanted to look at the deeds and went into that index, found all the deeds that involve Levi Hudson. Actually, any of the Hudsons that we've found so far. Looked at deeds for Levi, for Alexander, for Robert. And so for Levi, we found in 1821 that he was appointed as an attorney for Robert Hudson. Now, in this deed, it doesn't mention a relationship, but we happen to know from some other research, and I will show it to you, that the father, Robert Hudson, had died, I believe, in 1811. So this is likely a Robert Hudson Jr., and we will look into him more and talk about him shortly. So Levi also purchased 70 acres on Pittman Creek, and this was in 1832. He purchased it from John Richardson. In 1838, a Sabra McFall released dower on land to Levi Hudson. And then in 1839, Levi and Agnes sold 70 acres on Pittman Creek to Anderson Nunnally, and appeared to be the same land that they had purchased in 1832. And then, of course, we see Agnes Hudson on the Missouri census in 1840. The question is, what happened to Levi in between 1839 and 1840? Okay, because we don't find him after that. And I am going to talk a little bit about tax lists, and that was another area where he dropped off. And we'll go through and look at all the Hudsons on the tax list. It'll give us a good sense of what their years of residence were in Pulaski County. So I did research Robert Hudson Jr., and I did find him on the 1820 census, and that's this record over here on the right. And he did have a son, a male under age 10. So that would have been the same age range as Vincent J. Hudson. So that makes him another possibility, as well as Levi, to be the father of Vincent J. Hudson. I also found a deed for Robert Hudson, so another one besides the one where Levi Hudson was appointed to be his representative in order to sell some land. In this case, he's appointed Arthur B. Nash as an attorney to draw wages from troops commanded, and there's very specific information about a military regiment. So this was Colonel Slaughter's 15th Regiment of the Kentucky Militia as a private under John Evans, and this was in 1815. So based off of that information in the deed, I was able to find this military record, and this is just a published list of the soldiers of the War of 1812, and it is listed, by each company and each militia. And because of that description in the deed, I was able to connect this to Robert Hudson on this record. So what we know about Robert Hudson was that he served in the military and that he had, on two occasions, had somebody else represent him. And so it seems like Robert Hudson either moved out of this area or something happened to him. And I did not find any other records for him in this area after, I believe it was 1821, because He is listed on tax lists, which we're going to look at shortly. Um, if there was another Robert Hudson who lived a couple counties north, but by looking at tax lists, I was able to identify that they both were in different counties during the same year, so likely are not the same person. Okay. Now, one other type of record that I was able to identify was a court record. And let's see here. If I had all these records up here and now it wants me to sign back in. But I was able to find a court record um, that has indices for Pulaski County. So court records are going to be organized by type of court. County court records can be especially interesting because they can contain proceedings of maybe a guardianship. And what I was hoping to find was actually a guardianship. Perhaps something happened to Robert Hudson, perhaps Levi Hudson and Agnes Hudson became his guardian, Levi probably. So I went into the index of court records to locate that. Okay. What I found, so you don't always find indices with court records. And, as I mentioned, there's different types of court records. There's, the circuit court, there's the Supreme Court, and then there's the county court. And in this particular case, the index was organized by case type. So I was able to go through, look at the index for all the guardian cases, and then identify that there wasn't, any particular guardianship record for Levi Hudson or Robert Hudson. Now, what I learned from the Kentucky Historical Society is that in terms of probate records, other than wills, most of them did not survive prior to 1850. But as a good backup, we do have these court records, which actually, not here, but maybe a little further down in the record group, we actually have records of estates, and this is where I was able to find records for the Hudsons. So here I've got, looks like constable. So in this case, I had to scroll through here and determine, this looks like it's organized by case type, and then within that, it is organized by the name of the person and the date. Okay, so I did find under the estate section, nothing in guardianship, but in the estate section, I found some court minutes that talked about Levi Hudson becoming the administrator of the estate of Robert Hudson. So this is saying Clary. So now we have the widow's name of Robert Hudson. She did not want to take on the administration, so Levi agreed, and Alexander Hudson was also involved. So again, we have a great record here that connects four Hudsons. We have we have Levi, we have Alexander, we have Robert Sr., and we have Clary on this record. And then we have some other witnesses that we should take a look at: Jeremiah Boone and John Newby and Samuel Van Hook and Sherrod Reynolds. Okay, so from these documents so far, we've been able to put together a family. So we have Robert Hudson, we have Clary, and we'll talk about the name Rhoda in a moment. We have the son Levi, we have the son Alexander, also Robert Hudson we've identified. And then we also identified through another deed that mentioned Robert Hudson, Polly Kizzy. So she was involved with her husband in a transaction for land that resulted from the estate of Robert Hudson. So now we have four children, two of them possible candidates for Vincent J. Hudson's father. Okay, so the last thing that I took a look at was tax lists. So tax lists are great records. They're available in that catalog. You're going to go under the taxation section, and they're going to show you lists of, in this case, tithable males beginning at age 21. So once you start seeing someone appearing on a tax list, that's a good indication as to the year that they, may have turned 21. Um, Tax lists are going to contain information about land ownership, and then also if there's no land ownership, it will still show the name of the taxable male. And then in some cases, after probate, you will see the name of the widow on the tax list until the land is sold or until she remarries. So I went through actually 40 years of tax lists, something like that. Not all tax lists were available. This is where I really want to learn more about AI and how to compile some of this information because this is a lot of work, but well worth it. I was able to go through year by year. This is a great census substitute as well, and I was able to find my whole family group on these tax lists. So Robert Sr. was on the tax list until 1812. I believe the court December court minutes did show him deceased, I believe, in 1811, but he is on tax list until 1812. His wife shows up on the tax list in 2 years after he dies. Her name on there is Rhoda. And actually, we don't know for sure this is Clary, but we suspect, based off of the land description, that this is the same person. We do see Levi on the tax list for 30 years. So he's on there until 1838. So, he may have passed away after that. He is in that deed in 1839. And then we don't have any record of him after that. We have Robert Jr. on here. So he's there from 1810 to 1821. So after that, he disappears. So, I believe that something happened to him. But again, he could have moved away. But we are seeing deeds where other people are representing his interests. And then we have Alexander on this tax list. Now, we also found a couple other people. So we were looking for Thomas in the beginning, and then we were also looking for Joel. And both Joel and Thomas were listed right under Levi in these tax lists, and they were both there from the years 1831 to 1838. Okay, now Thomas comes back, A. Thomas, and we do need to do some work to determine if that's the same Thomas. But again, I think this is a good clue that Joel could be Vincent J. Hudson. We did not find him. I did find the other Vincent J. Hudson on the tax list, and I suspected that he is the other Vincent J. Hudson because he was listed next to his father, Daniel, who we'd identified on a marriage record. But we do see Joel. So again, this Joel could be Vincent J. Hudson, and then Thomas would be another son of Levi. Okay, so here's what we learned. We learned that Alexander Hudson was likely not the father of Vincent J. Hudson because he had only daughters. Robert Hudson Jr. was a possible candidate because he did have a male Vincent's age living in the household in 1820. But after 1821, we don't have any record of, I don't recall. I think one of those deeds was a little bit later, but he appears to have other people handling transactions for him, and we're not finding him after 1821. We do have a positive ID on paternal grandparents. They were identified as Robert Hudson and Rhoda Clary from Virginia. And we think that Vincent J. Hudson could also be known as Joel, who sold livestock in his bed to Agnes in Missouri. And if he is Joel, he is probably the son of Levi and Agnes Hudson. Okay, so where do we go from here? So one thing I wanted to talk about in the beginning, and I'll bring it up now, is when you're looking to prove parentage, there is direct evidence, and then sometimes there's indirect evidence. There's actually a third type called negative evidence as well. But indirect is where you're going to find a marriage record, like we found that says, okay, Alexander Hudson, your father is Daniel Hudson. That's direct evidence of his father. Robert Hudson. But for Vincent J. Hudson, we haven't found that. We found, even if he is Joel, we haven't found any direct evidence. So we're really using this indirect evidence to go through the possible candidates for Vincent J. Hudson's father and identify the family group and who would based off the records who would make sense to be Vincent J. Hudson's father. So that is indirect style of analysis of evidence. From here, what we want to be able to do is start looking at some of those other names on deeds. We just want a little bit more evidence that Joel is Vincent J. Hudson. We also still want to see, can we rule Robert Hudson out? So if we begin to start looking at those deed transactions, we may find some more connections that can help us prove that. Okay. All right, so that is our video blog for today. So now in the future, we can take this line and extend it. It's going to start to get really interesting here. We're going to be going into Virginia. We're probably going to find, perhaps a Revolutionary War ancestor. So that's exciting. But I'm actually, for the video blog, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to jump over to analyzing a female ancestor and her parents. So as you may know, finding the maiden name, finding records for females can be more difficult than finding them for men in the family tree. So next week, I will see you again with a video about finding one of my female ancestors' lineage. Thank you.